The technician's hands were wrong. That was the first thing Fleet Analyst Verath noticed when she reviewed the salvage footage from the Kepler-7 debris field. Not the debris itself. She had cataloged 17 destroyed human manufacturing platforms in the past 8 months, and the wreckage followed predictable patterns by now. Ruptured coolant lines, collapsed scaffold rings, the particular way human alloys fractured under Council-grade disruptor fire, more like broken bone than shattered metal. No, what stopped her was the technician's hands. The footage was recovered from a human survival pod, its internal camera still running when the salvage crews cracked it open. The human inside, male, young by their biological markers, wearing a maintenance uniform scorched along the left shoulder, was not screaming, was not praying, was not attempting to signal for rescue. He was writing something on the interior wall of the pod, with his fingers, in his own blood. Verath had watched the clip 41 times. She still could not determine what he was writing. The Council's translation algorithms identified fragments, numbers, a coordinate prefix, what might have been a formula, but the full sequence never resolved into meaning. The pod had been found 11 light minutes from the nearest destroyed forge. What disturbed Verath was not the writing, it was his expression. He was not afraid, he was concentrating. Like he was finishing something. The Council's campaign against the human star forges had begun 16 months earlier, and by every measurable metric, it had been a masterwork of institutional efficiency. The forges were the problem. Everyone on the High Council agreed on this. Not the humans themselves. The species was young, technically limited, politically fractured among themselves in ways that made coordinated resistance theoretically impossible. Humans were not dangerous. The forges were dangerous because the forges were growing. In 7 years, humanity had constructed 19 orbital manufacturing platforms of a class the Council had no precise category for. They were not warships. They were not colony engines. They were not the kind of industrial infrastructure that fit any recognized developmental model for a species at humanity's technological stage. They were something between a factory, a laboratory, and something the Council's xenoarchaeologists kept describing in reports as architecturally anxious, as though the structures themselves were built under urgency, built towards something, without the deliberate elegance that marked rational long-term planning. Councillor Drozveth, who chaired the Containment Committee, had summarized the consensus position in the third session. They are building something they haven't told us about. The forges are the means. We don't know the end. The motion to destroy the forges passed with 31 votes, 4 abstentions, 0 dissent on record. The first 7 forges were destroyed before the humans formally protested. The protest was noted, filed, and categorized under Tier 4 diplomatic friction, which required no mandatory response under Council procedural law. By the time humanity's ambassador requested emergency audience before the full Council, Forge number 14 was already burning. "You are making," Ambassador Lena Vasquez had said, standing at the center of the Council's vast amphitheater floor, her voice entirely level. A very specific mistake. Councillor Drozveth had responded with the patience one uses for a young species that does not yet understand the geometry of power. "Ambassador, we have reviewed the Forge's output manifests, their energy consumption signatures, their structural class. We have concluded they represent a weapons development program inconsistent with your treaty obligations. They are not weapons platforms." "We disagree." Vasquez had looked at him for a long moment. Then she had said quietly, "I know you do." And she had left. 3 weeks later, Forge number 15 burned. Verath had been assigned to the Post-Action Analysis Division 8 months into the campaign, promoted from Standard Salvage Review. When her supervisors noticed, she filed longer reports than required. She had a habit the Council's system didn't quite have a classification for. She kept asking questions after the answers had already been officially accepted. The Forge destructions were officially complete. 19 platforms confirmed destroyed. Campaign designated a success by the Containment Committee, resources being reallocated. Vareth's job was to finalize the documentation. She kept finding things that didn't fit. The first was the inventory discrepancy. Council intelligence had identified 19 forges through long-range observation, hull signature tracking, and 2 separate informant reports from trading partners near human space. 19 identified, 19 destroyed, a perfect numerical closure that should have ended her questions. Except the energy consumption data from human colonial infrastructure didn't match a 19-forge operation. It matched a 20-forge operation, had matched it for at least 3 years. She had flagged this in her report. Her supervisor had returned it with a notation, margin of error within acceptable range. Close the file. She did not close the file. The second anomaly was the debris, specifically the rate of it. Each destroyed forge had produced a standard debris field consistent with its size and composition. Vareth had cataloged all 17 she could access footage from, but when she modeled the total mass dispersal, the physical material that should have been present across all 19 destroyed forges, the numbers came up short. Not dramatically short, not obviously short, 5 to 8% short, which was exactly the kind of discrepancy that looks like measurement error until you realize it has appeared consistently, in the same direction, across every single data point. Something that should have been in the debris wasn't there. She didn't know yet what it meant, but she knew it meant something. The third anomaly was the technician in the pod, the one who was writing. Because Vareth had finally, after her 41st viewing, recognized the coordinate prefix in his blood-written sequence. It wasn't from any of the 19 known forge locations. "You're still here." The voice came from the doorway of the analysis suite. Vareth looked up. Senior Archivist Con-Ella stood with a data tablet tucked under one arm, expression carrying the mild concern of someone who had worked with obsessive junior analysts before and had learned to identify the warning signs. "I have outstanding items," Vareth said. "The campaign is closed." "I'm aware." Con-Ella stepped inside, glanced at the display wall, 19 forge sites, debris models, energy consumption curves, a paused frame of a human hand writing in blood on a survival pod wall. The archivist was quiet for a moment. "What are you looking for?" she finally asked. Vareth pulled up the energy consumption overlay. "This operation ran on 20 forge equivalent power for 3 years. We destroyed 19. Con-Ella studied the numbers, said nothing. "The debris mass is consistently low," Vareth continued. "Not randomly low, consistently, directionally low across all 17 data-accessible sites. And this." She brought up the coordinate fragment from the pod footage. "This prefix doesn't match any forge location on record. It might not be a coordinate at all. Translation confidence on that footage is below 60%. 63%, Vareth said, "which means it might be, and if it is, it points to a region we didn't survey." Con-Ella set her tablet down very carefully. "Vareth, what you're suggesting, if you're right, it means the Containment Committee destroyed 19 forges and declared victory." She paused, while the 20th kept running. "I'm not suggesting anything," Vareth said. "I'm asking why the numbers don't close." They looked at each other across the width of the room. "Show me the coordinate fragment," Con-Ella said. The region the fragment pointed toward, if it was a coordinate, if the 63% translation confidence resolved in the right direction, was not empty space. That would have been easier. Empty space could be explained away. It was a debris field. An old one, geologically old by interstellar standards, the remnant of a planetary body that had broken apart somewhere between 200 and 400,000 years ago, dense enough to scatter sensor returns, cold enough that thermal signatures would be difficult to distinguish from background radiation. An excellent place to hide something. The Council's survey records showed one pass through the region 8 years ago. Before humanity's Forge program had begun, standard long-range mapping, nothing of interest noted. But humanity's Forge program had begun shortly after. Verath ran the timeline 3 times to be sure. The survey pass was 8 years ago. The first confirmed human Forge construction began 7 years and 4 months ago. She pulled the original survey data, which took 2 days because it had been archived in a low-priority storage tier. When she finally accessed it, she found the survey had been conducted by a contracted vessel, not a Council ship, but a third-party surveyor working under a Council exploration license. She found the survey crew manifest. She found a name she recognized. The contracted vessel's secondary systems technician, listed as present for the survey 8 years ago, was named on the manifest as El Vasquez. "That is not possible," Carnella said. "It's in the manifest." "She's the human ambassador. She was a—" Carnella stopped, recalculated. 8 years ago she would have been what? A civilian contractor. Survey technician by the credential listed. The survey company dissolved 4 years ago, but the records are there. The silence in the analysis suite was a different quality now, less comfortable, more load-bearing. "She surveyed the debris field," Carnella said slowly, "and then humanity started building forges. Within 4 months. And she has spent the last 16 months standing in front of the Council, asking us to stop destroying the forges." "Yes." Carnella sat down, "not telling us about the 20th one." "No. She knew we didn't know." "She said it herself," Verath said. "She pulled the audio file from the Council session archive 8 months old and played the relevant fragment. Ambassador Vasquez's voice, level and precise. I know you do. Not arguing, not correcting, acknowledging." She had known, Verath realized, with a sensation she didn't have a precise word for, that the Council would never find what it was looking for. She had stood in the amphitheater and let them believe the campaign would succeed, and said 3 words that were technically true and completely misleading. "I know you do." "What is the 20th Forge building?" Carnella asked. Verath looked at the display wall. 19 destroyed sites. An energy consumption curve that was still 8 months after the campaign's declared completion, running at the same level as before. "I don't know," she said. "But whatever it is, they didn't need 19 forges to build it. They needed 19 forges to make sure we'd never look for the 20th. The request for a Council survey mission to the debris field region took 3 weeks to be approved, because officially the campaign was closed and resources had been reallocated, and no one wanted to authorize expenditure for what Verath's supervisor kept calling a margin of error investigation. Carnella invoked a provision Verath had never heard of, something in the foundational Council charter about unresolved threat assessments requiring mandatory review, and that changed the political calculus enough that authorization eventually came through. During those 3 weeks, Verath did the only thing she could do. She kept reading. She pulled every available record of human behavior during the campaign, ambassador testimonies, intercepted communications from human civilian networks, which the Council's intelligence division had been monitoring under standard protocol, statements from human trading partners, records of what humans had publicly said and what they had done. The pattern she found was the second thing that kept her awake. Humans had protested the Forge destructions loudly, publicly, with the kind of emotional intensity that the Council's xenopsychology advisors had noted and classified as expected grief response to infrastructure loss. The protests were taken as confirmation that the forges mattered, which was used to support the decision to continue destroying them. But Verath looked at what the protests actually said. Not a single human public statement, not one, across 16 months and thousands of intercepted communications, had mentioned what the forges were for. They said, "Stop destroying our infrastructure." They said, "This is a violation of sovereign development rights." They said, "The Council is acting without justification." They never said, "You're destroying the wrong thing." They never said, "You don't understand what these are." They never said anything that would direct Council attention anywhere specific. Because misdirection, Verath understood now, doesn't require lying. It only requires letting people believe the thing they already want to believe and never correcting them. 19 forges destroyed publicly with appropriate human outrage, while the 20th stayed cold and quiet in the debris field, wrapped in 400,000 years of dead planetary rock. And while the Council congratulated itself on a successful containment operation, humans were writing coordinates in their own blood on the interior walls of survival pods, concentrating, finishing something. Her hands were shaking slightly when she pulled up the energy consumption data again, not from fear, exactly. From the particular vertigo of realizing a picture is much larger than its frame. Because the numbers weren't just telling her there was a 20th forge. They were telling her the 20th forge's energy consumption had been increasing, slowly, steadily, for 8 months, growing in a pattern she now recognized because she had cataloged 18 forges before their destruction, and she knew what a forge looked like when it was approaching operational completion. Whatever the 20th forge was building, it was almost finished. The survey ship reached the debris field 17 days after departure. Verath was aboard, which had required another 3 rounds of authorization, because analysts were not normally deployed on active survey missions, and Conella had deployed a frankly impressive sequence of bureaucratic maneuvers to make it happen. The debris field looked, on approach, exactly like nothing. Which was the point? Ancient rock, dispersed over a wide volume, pinging back sensor returns with the kind of chaotic consistency that implied purely natural origin. The pilot swept the initial approach vector twice before confirming they were in the right region. "I'm not seeing anything," the pilot said. His name was Torsveth, young for a Council survey pilot and carrying the particular professional skepticism of someone who had been told to look for something that multiple other people had told him wasn't there. "Debris is consistent with natural breakup, no refined material signatures. Expand the thermal scan to include the lower frequency bands," Verath said. "That's outside standard survey parameters." "I know." Torsveth ran her a look that communicated volumes about what he thought of analysts who came aboard and asked for non-standard procedures. Then he ran the expanded thermal scan. The display changed. Not dramatically. The adjustment in color gradient was subtle, the kind of thing that would be easy to dismiss as sensor artifact if you weren't specifically looking for a heat signature that had been designed to look like background radiation. But Verath was looking for exactly that. "There," she said. "That's background," Torsveth said. "Then, that's too regular to be background. Take us in. If that's a human installation and we approach without. Take us in." He did. The forge was not what she had expected. She had cataloged 19 human forge platforms. She knew their shapes, the scaffold rings, the modular expansion sections, the particular geometry of human industrial construction that the Council's engineers described as structurally redundant, meaning humans built things stronger than they needed to be, which was wasteful by rational standards, and which Verath had stopped thinking of as wasteful approximately 3 days ago. The 20th forge was none of those shapes. It was a sphere, A perfect sphere which was wrong for a manufacturing platform, wrong for a weapons system, wrong for anything the Council had a category for. It was embedded in the debris field, braced against three large rock masses that had been subtly repositioned. Varath could see the thrusters scoring on their surfaces to hold it in place. It had no visible docking ports, no visible weapon emplacements, no visible anything, because its hull was designed to present the same radar and thermal cross-section as the surrounding rock. But now that they were close enough, she could see the light. Not from outside, from within. The sphere was translucent at this distance, and somewhere inside it something was radiating, not heat, not propulsion. Not any signature Varath, recognized from 19 prior forge analyses. It was radiating coherence. She didn't have a better word. The signal pattern was intensely organized, structured in a way that felt, to her analytical brain, like the last page of a very long document. Council survey vessel, a voice said through the comm. Calm, female, speaking Council standard with a human accent that Varath recognized from archived recordings. This is Ambassador Lena Vasquez. We've been expecting you. Torsveth looked at Varath. His expression had moved well past professional skepticism into something he didn't have a professional category for. You've been expecting us, Varath said. You're the analyst who found the energy discrepancy, Vasquez said. We estimated someone would find it eventually. We hoped for a little more time, but a brief pause. Here we are. Ambassador, Varath kept her voice even through an effort of will. What is the 20th Forge building? A longer pause this time, not the pause of someone deciding whether to answer. The pause of someone choosing how much truth to release into the moment. It's finished, Vasquez said. It finished 6 days ago. The shuttle that brought Vasquez aboard the survey vessel carried 2 other humans, security personnel who remained near the docking hatch without speaking, standing with the quiet stillness of people who have accepted whatever is about to happen. Vasquez herself sat across from Varath in the survey vessel's small briefing room, and she looked tired, not defeated. Tired the way people look after they have held a very heavy thing for a very long time and have finally set it down. She was older than the archival footage. The 16 months of the campaign had done something to the lines around her eyes. You surveyed the debris field, Varath said. 8 years ago, you found this location. I found this location, Vasquez confirmed. And then humanity built 19 forges to draw our attention away from it. We built 19 forges because we needed the fabrication output, Vasquez said. The misdirection was secondary, convenient. She paused. We knew the Council would eventually identify the forge program as a potential threat. We knew they would move to contain it. We needed enough time. Time for what? Vasquez looked at her hands on the table. Do you know what an anchor is? Varath did not. Then I need you to understand something first, Vasquez said, about why we started building. 8 years ago, humanity had found something in the debris field. Not the location for a forge. Something already there, something old, cold, and almost undetectable, which was presumably why the standard Council survey 8 years prior had missed it entirely, and why Vasquez, who was there as a technician and not as a diplomatic official with incentive to report accurately, had not flagged it in her submitted survey data. What humanity had found was a weapon, not a human weapon, not a Council weapon, something older than either, embedded in the dead rock of a broken planet like a seed in frozen soil, waiting for the specific combination of proximity and activation energy that would wake it. The Council's xenoarchaeologists would have had a name for it. Several names, actually. The academic literature Vasquez knew, because humanity had spent 3 years quietly mining every available Council research archive, called them remnants, artifacts of a civilization that had preceded the Council by somewhere between 800,000 and 2 million years, a civilization about which almost nothing was known except that it had ended catastrophically, and that it had left things behind. Things that were not decorative. It was going to wake up, Vasquez said. Not immediately, but our physicists dated the activation sequence at 7 to 12 years from the moment we found it. She looked at Varath steadily. That was 8 years ago. The briefing room was very quiet. You didn't tell the council, Varath said. We ran models. If we reported it immediately, the council would have dispatched a containment and research team. Standard protocol. And our physicists concluded, and I want to be precise here, that the standard council containment protocol for a remnant artifact of this class would have accelerated the activation sequence. That's an extraordinarily difficult argument to make to a governing body that has not yet accepted your civilization as a full peer. Vasquez's voice remained level. We were 4 years into council membership. We had no established scientific credibility in xenoarchaeology. We had no standing to tell the council that their experts were wrong, and that the correct response to a doomsday artifact was to leave it alone, while a species they considered primitive built an untested countermeasure around it. Varath stared at her. So you built 19 forges. To build the 20th. And let the council destroy them. We needed them destroyed, Vasquez said. The fabrication output from 17 of the 19 was never the point. The material was transferred and consolidated into the sphere during construction phases. The forges were scaffolding. And then we needed the scaffolding taken down, because leaving 19 forge platforms adjacent to the activation site would have been a secondary energy trigger. The shape of it was assembling in Varath's mind in pieces, each piece locking into place with the particular horrible clarity of something that has been true all along. You let us destroy them, she said. You protested, loudly, to make sure we would keep destroying them. We protested because our people were angry and afraid and because silence would have looked suspicious. But yes, Vasquez did not look away. The protests were genuine, and also, yes. The technician in the pod, the one who was writing on the wall. Vasquez's expression shifted. The weariness deepened into something else. Mara's son, she said quietly. He was 23. He was on Forge 11 when the council strike hit. The pod launched before the collapse. A pause. He didn't survive the debris field. He was writing the coordinates. He was making sure, Vasquez said, that someone found them, even if we couldn't get word out another way. He knew if he was in that pod that he might be the last person who knew where the sphere was, and he made sure someone would know after him. She stopped. That was his choice, his alone. Varath thought about the footage, the concentration on his face. Not fear, not despair. Something that looked, from the outside, like the last fraction of a very long calculation being resolved. What does the sphere do? Varath asked. Vasquez was quiet for what felt like a very long time. It anchors the remnant artifact's activation sequence to a harmonic that, she paused, visibly translating from physics into something communicable. The remnant was going to wake up. We could not stop that. No one can stop a remnant activation once the sequence is past a threshold, and this one passed that threshold 3 years ago. What we could do, what the sphere does, is change what it wakes up to. I don't understand. The remnant's activation response is calibrated to the energy signature of the surrounding space. It reads its environment and responds based on what it finds. What it was designed to find 2 million years ago was a specific type of stellar civilization, a type that no longer exists. Vasquez's hands were flat on the table. Without calibration, it responds to the nearest equivalent, which is the council. The sphere resets that calibration. The remnant wakes up, reads the sphere's harmonic, interprets its environment as neutral, and remains dormant. For how long? Our models say several thousand years, long enough to properly study it, long enough to find a permanent solution. The silence in the room was enormous. If the sphere hadn't been completed, Varath started. 4 days ago our upper estimate margin expired, Vasquez said. The remnant is activating. The sphere engaged 6 days ago at the activation threshold. We had a 2-week window." She paused. "You found us with 8 days left." Verath looked at the display screen still showing the survey feed, the sphere, braced in ancient rock, radiating coherence, wrapping something old and catastrophic in a harmonic shell of human engineering. "The Council destroyed 19 of your forges," she said. "Yes." "And you kept building." "Yes." "Why didn't you just," Verath stopped, rebuilt the question. "Why didn't you evacuate, warn the nearest inhabited systems, run?" Vasquez looked at her with an expression that Verath would spend years afterward trying to accurately describe in her reports. It was not contempt. It was not pride. It was something quieter and more difficult than either. "Because there wasn't anywhere to run to," Vasquez said simply. "The activation radius at full emergence covers 40 light years. There are 9 council species within that range, approximately 40 billion people." She said it the way someone says a number they have said to themselves so many times it has become structural, weight-bearing, the foundation everything else stands on. "We ran the math. We built the sphere." Torsveth, who had been listening from the hatch, sat down on the deck with his back against the wall. Not dramatically. Just sat down, because standing had started to feel like an unreasonable demand. Verath became aware she had been holding her breath and released it. "The Council destroyed your forges," she said. "And the whole time, every destroyed platform, every protest, every diplomatic session, you were protecting them." "We were protecting everyone," Vasquez said, "the Council included." "They didn't know." "No. They never asked what you were building." "They decided they already knew," not accusatory, factual. Councillor Drozveth used the phrase weapons development program. "We let that stand." "You let them believe." "We let them believe what they believed." Vasquez's voice was still steady, but something in it was fraying at the edges in a way that felt deeply human. "We had 40 billion lives and a closing window and a governing body that had classified our civilization as a minor threat and would not have accepted our science. We made choices." A long pause. "I have thought about whether we made the right ones every night for 8 years." "Have you decided?" Vasquez looked at her hands again. "I've decided that 40 billion people are alive." She looked up. "I haven't decided much else." The report Verath submitted was 47 pages. She filed it on a classified channel that ran directly to the Council executive, bypassing the Containment Committee entirely, which required a procedural authority she technically did not have and which Canella, reviewing it remotely from the archive, countersigned without hesitation. The Council's response to the report took 11 days. During those 11 days, the remnant artifacts activation sequence. According to the sensor data, the survey vessel was now collecting from the sphere's external diagnostic array, continued progressing, not toward emergence, toward something the sphere's harmonic was catching and redirecting like a hand placed on a turning wheel. It was not clean. It was not elegant. The sphere's engineering, by Council standards, was improvised, built from the salvaged output of 19 platforms, designed by a species that had been doing xenoarchaeological physics for less than a decade, tested against nothing because there was nothing equivalent to test against. It was holding. On the 7th day, 3 Council xenoarchaeologists arrived via emergency transit. They spent 6 hours reviewing the sphere's specifications against their own knowledge of remnant artifact classification. Then they spent 2 hours in silence. Then the senior of them, a specialist named Orath Khan who had published 40 years of remnant research and who had a reputation for forensic precision that other Council scientists described as intimidating, said, "How did they know the harmonic resonance configuration?" Vasquez, who was present, said, "We didn't. We ran 4,000 simulations and chose the configuration with the highest probability distribution." Orath Khan looked at the sphere specifications for a long time. The probability distribution on this configuration. He stopped. Where did you get the activation sequence data? To run simulations, you would need. The artifacts own a mission pattern, Vasquez said. We had 8 years of close proximity recording. 8 years of, Orath Khan stopped again. That's not in any survey filing. No. You spent 8 years collecting data from an activating remnant artifact that we didn't know existed. Built an untested countermeasure using fabrication infrastructure we were simultaneously destroying. And then let us destroy it because the empty sites were a necessary component of the activation dampening field. The mass shadow pattern of the cleared sites contributed to the harmonic geometry, Vasquez said. Yes. Another silence. You used our weapons fire, Orath Khan said, as part of your construction. Vasquez said nothing. You needed the forges destroyed in that specific sequence, didn't you? Varath said. The realization arrived like cold water. That's why the debris fields were consistent. You needed them destroyed cleanly in the specific order they were destroyed to build the mass shadow geometry. You filed the protests to slow the rate of destruction, not to stop it. Vasquez was very still. The Containment Committee's targeting sequence was not optimal for our geometry. We introduced delays when we could, but essentially, yes, she paused. You slowed down twice when we requested diplomatic review sessions. That was enough. The 3 xenoarchaeologists looked at each other. Orath Khan looked at Vasquez. Then he looked at Varath. They used us, he said, not with anger, with something that sounded in his voice like the early stages of awe that hasn't yet learned what shape to take. They needed us to destroy specific things in a specific sequence, Varath said, so they made sure we would by making us believe we were dismantling a threat. She heard herself speaking and simultaneously understood, for the first time, what it felt like to be on the other side of a misinterpretation. We were never the containment operation. What were you? Torsveth asked. Varath looked at the sphere on the display, braced in dead rock, holding something ancient and terrible quiet in the dark. We were the demolition crew, she said. The council session that convened on the 14th day was classified at the highest available tier. No external transcript was filed. What Varath knew of it came from Khan Ella, who had been present as archival witness, and from the formal motion that was ultimately entered into council law. Councillor Drozveth, according to Khan Ella, had not spoken for the first 4 hours of the session. He had reviewed the report, reviewed the sphere specifications, reviewed the artifact activation data, and sat in the silence of someone who has discovered that the thing they believed was a threat was the thing standing between them and an extinction event. When he finally spoke, he had said, "How long did they know we didn't understand what they were doing?" And Khan Ella had said, "Since the first protest session, Counselor, Ambassador Vasquez knew the moment the Containment Committee's decision was announced that you had misidentified the forges. She made a calculation, a pause. She decided the cost of correcting your understanding was higher than the cost of letting it stand." What was the cost of letting it stand? Khan Ella had looked at the counselor with a precision Varath could only imagine. 19 forges, several hundred human workers killed during platform destructions, her own people's public grief, 8 years of classified engineering under active suppression conditions. She paused again, and trusting that when you finally found the 20th forge, someone on the council would be willing to ask the right questions rather than issue a destruction order first. Drozveth had been quiet for a very long time. "She trusted us," he said finally, "to eventually be worth trusting." "She bet 40 billion lives on it," Khan Ella said. "Yes." Vasquez was on the survey vessel when Varath brought her the council's decision. The sphere was still active on the displays. It would remain active for the next 40 to 80 years, while humanity and council xenoarchaeologists developed the permanent stabilization solution together. which was a collaboration that did not yet have a name, and did not yet have a process, and did not yet have anything except a shared catastrophe, and the slowly developing understanding that humans had been the only species paying close enough attention to notice it was coming. Full scientific partnership status, Verath said. Permanent council advisory seat in xenoarchaeological research. Formal acknowledgement that the containment campaign was conducted under incomplete intelligence. She paused. That last part required 6 separate votes. Vasquez was quiet for a moment, and Veth. He authored the motion for the advisory seat. Verath watched Vasquez's face carefully. He said, and I'm reading from the session record, that the council owed humanity a debt that its formal categories were not equipped to describe. Vasquez nodded. She was looking at the sphere on the display. After a long moment, she said, almost to herself, 22 people died on those forges. Her voice had changed. The level, calibrated quality was gone, replaced by something that had no instrumental function. When I think about the geometry, about how we needed the debris fields, She stopped. You didn't cause those deaths, Verath said. No, you did. Not accusatory, factual, the same inflection Verath had used about misdirection. But I knew they were coming, and I made the calculation that saving 40 billion lives required. She stopped again. There is no clean place to stand when you do the math at that scale. There is no version of this where you come out with clean hands. Her voice was completely level. I have thought about Mara's son every day for 8 months. I will think about him every day for the rest of my life. That is the cost. That is part of what this cost. Outside the viewport, the debris field rotated slowly in the dark. Ancient rock, broken planet, dead civilization's last warning wrapped in the specific shape of human engineering and human loss. Verath thought about a 23-year-old on the interior wall of a survival pod, bleeding, concentrating, making sure the coordinates survived if he did not, making sure something continued, making sure the work didn't die with him. She thought about what species does that. Not the strongest species, not the oldest, not the most advanced, not the ones with the longest memory or the most powerful weapons or the most sophisticated understanding of the universe's fundamental architecture. The species that, when they found an extinction event in the dark, did not wait for someone else to handle it, did not report it and step back and trust the established institutions to respond correctly, did not evacuate, did not run, did not decide that 40 billion lives belonging to civilizations that had not yet accepted them as peers were someone else's problem. They hit a sphere in a debris field. They built 19 forges and let them burn. They wrote coordinates in their own blood to make sure the work would not be lost. They kept building. Not because they were certain it would work. The probability distribution on the harmonic configuration was 41%. Verath had found that number buried in the sphere's design specifications and had not said it aloud to anyone because she did not know what to do with it. 41%, less than even odds, on 40 billion lives. And they had built the sphere anyway, because 41% was better than 0, and 0 was what you got if you stopped. The remnant artifact, deep in the debris field, pulsed once against the sphere's harmonic shell. A slow, immense, ancient signal, something that had been sleeping longer than humanity had existed waking to find itself redirected, contained, quieted. The sphere held. The sphere held, and somewhere in the archived survey footage, a young man's hands were moving on a wall in the dark, and his face held the expression of someone finishing what needs to be finished, and Verath understood now what that expression was. It was not courage. It was not heroism. It had no name in any council language she had ever studied, because it described something those languages had never needed to say. It was the face of a species that had looked at an impossible calculation and decided the answer was not to stop calculating. The council had spent 16 months destroying humanity's work, believing they were the containment operation, never once asking what they were containing humanity from. They had been inside the protection the whole time.